This is the Global Podcast Network, where executives and professionals connect, share, and inspire. Stay tuned for the conversations that drive success.
We've said it so many times here. I'm going to say it again. Most of what challenges you as an adult came from your childhood. It's all there. Doesn't mean you had a bad childhood. Maybe you had a challenging childhood. But it's got the clues as to why you do what you do now. We're going to look at that. Might be an eye-opener for many of us. And she helps people make those realizations and then move their lives forward through counseling and just being there to support and meeting them where they are. She also offers mediation services as well. She is Angie Howlett, and she's back with us. How are you doing today?
I'm doing very well. Thank you. How are you?
Eager to learn more about this because I've been looking into it, studying it, I call it connecting the dots to my childhood and why I do or why I don't do, what I should do at this point in life. But let's pick one thing that somebody could be dealing with now and some examples of what it might tie back to in their childhood. What do you think?
So lately, a lot of what I've been dealing with is neurodivergency is a huge, buzzword, you could say, that comes up in my work a lot. It seems like almost everybody these days has a diagnosis of either ADHD, autism. Now, there may be some environmental factors that may cause that, but there's some very interesting emerging research and information available that connects a lot of these diagnoses and what we call neurodivergence to adverse childhood events and those attachment figures that we have or maybe don't have in childhood.
So I'm quite surprised here. So are you saying somebody that has a diagnosis for ADHD, that could tie back to their childhood?
So a lot of the work that I've been doing, you mentioned that I do some mediation, and lately actually I have been doing mediation, but not with the couple or with the parents. I've been working with them on a separate basis. And for one couple, they're not a couple anymore, they're co-parents, but they're struggling. But one thing that comes up a lot is one of the parents is very focused on getting a psychoeducational assessment for ADHD. And one of the things that I have been learning each year in the province of Saskatchewan, actually I think it's a Canadian Association of Social Workers requirement, we have to have 40 hours of professional development every year in order to keep our credentials. And so one of the things that I have been really learning and diving into is when we see ADHD symptoms, it often, especially in younger kids, they mimic a lot of the same patterns as PTSD.
Wow. And is this again going back to childhood? Like if any of these, not that it is the cause, but it can be the clue to why it may be even more challenging?
Yeah, so Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris, she has a TED Talk, and Dr. Gabor Mate, actually, who I'm sure you've heard a lot about, has done extensive research on how adverse childhood events create a lot of, how do I say this? It changes our genetic response or our neural pathways to responding to conflict, to responding to adversity. And so, for instance, we hear a lot of especially for kids in the, raised in the 80s and 90s, we heard a lot of, cry it out, the ferberization method, where, we leave our kids to cry, and eventually they'll wear themselves out and they'll fall asleep. But the research that's coming about now in recent years, I guess, is, around 10 years or so, is that when we leave children to cry it out, they're communicating with us.
Mm-hmm.
My mom once said to me, "It's okay. It doesn't hurt babies to cry." And at first I thought, well, okay, yeah, it's fine for babies to cry. That's what they do. They cry. But they're communicating with us.
Yep.
They're communicating with us. They're asking for comfort because they can't meet their own needs. And when we leave a child to cry it out, that's signaling to them that they cannot trust the very people that they're biologically wired to trust.
This one's painful because how many times have you had a toddler, baby, and crying in the crib? And it's been said, just let him cry because you keep going in there. So now it almost sounds like a catch-22 that if you leave them crying, they're and I totally get what you're saying, that it is communication. Even children with ADHD, behavioral issues, all of that, sometimes it's looked at as like, they're acting up again. Look what they're doing. They're communicating. That's how they communicate. Mm-hmm. We don't look at it that way many times.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so there's this other program that I'm working on it slowly. It's through the Alberta Family Wellness Initiatives, and it's called the Brain Story. It's a certification program. It's online. It's free. And this is where a lot of this information is. There was a summit held in Banff. I think it was around like 2012, 2013 or something. But this is kind of where all of this information kind of started to surface. And I think a lot of, medical professionals, social workers, psychologists are looking at, why does this group, particularly, millennials, folks who are my age, why are we having such problems with mental health issues that wasn't there maybe however long before? No, I'm not saying any parents are to blame for letting their kids have a cry. Absolutely not. My husband and I, we kind of took a little bit of an approach with our daughter where it was like we would give her, 5 or 10 minutes to sort things out for herself in the crib, and then we would go give her some comfort. And, sure enough, after a few minutes of some comforting, nurturing attachment, she would fall asleep just fine. And so you do have to find the balance that works for you as parents, because it's very, very stressful to be a parent. And
Sure.
Sometimes you just need that solution, right? But yeah, there's lots of things that are coming out of the woodwork that we thought were harmless, and now research is being done that shows maybe we need to take a different approach. And that approach is focusing on how early attachment is so important.
Ooh, would you say that it's the majority of the challenges that we have where a child, baby, isn't seen, isn't heard, and their emotional needs may not be met? Throwing no parents under the bus. It's, we wouldn't know otherwise. Nobody told us that, if a baby's not getting its needs met and you think you're doing it as a parent, and every child is different, you could have two children experience the same exact thing. One internalizes it way differently than the other one. That one that internalizes it one way may have challenges later in life. What's the answer here? What do you think, Angie?
Well, I don't know if I know what the answer is, but I think that there's a lot to that, because I was just having a conversation actually with the grandmother of one of my clients, and we were kind of discussing what this particular individual needs might be. And she gave me a little bit of a family history. He has an older sister, he has a younger brother that was born 10 years after him. And that is really curious to me. It's really interesting. I think a lot of the times we've been conditioned to believe that having a large family is really good, having siblings is really important, but we have a generation, I guess, of people who are finding that their sibling relationships can be very, very toxic. My two sisters haven't spoken in almost 10 years. And so sometimes our sibling relationships aren't the, I guess, key to companionship that we once thought that they were. And so to your point, if you have a child who has the oldest child or the first child, and they've had unlimited attention with mom and dad, and they get the experiences and they get the financial resources, and then baby number 2 comes along, it's nobody's fault, but that really impacts that brain development of the older child or of the first child, because all of a sudden, like you say, their emotional needs are not being met, not because the parents have any intention not to meet them, but because a new baby takes a lot of attention and focus.
And one thing I don't think anybody ever considers, that not every sibling situation is the same. Not everybody gets along. Bullying. Now we think about, a kid going to school and there's bullying there. No, the bullying could be from your sibling. You might not even remember it as a child, but that impacted your life. And think about that for a second. It's one thing to get bullied, on the playground from some random kid in your class. Now you're getting bullied by a loved one, brother, sister. Whoa, heavy stuff there, right?
Yeah. Absolutely. And I'm working with a dad whose kids, they're, mom and dad are separated. And, the oldest gets, hockey is huge here, very big in Canada, particularly in Saskatchewan. And, the older boy gets the not necessarily just the attention, but hockey takes a lot of time and financial resources. And the other one who doesn't play hockey doesn't have as much of that consistent attention, for lack of better words. And there have now been observations that the older brother is now bullying the younger brother, and these are all, and it's the younger brother is the one that's being looked at for the psychoeducational assessment. And many psychologists, doctors might look at that and say, he's got ADHD, but I'm looking at that through the family lens, and I'm looking at that through the environmental lens, and I say it's not ADHD. It may look like ADHD on the surface, but there is, and especially with the toxic stress of parental separation, this child is likely exhibiting features of PTSD, not just from the separation of the parent, but now, being bullied by the older brother.
Wow. You mentioned attachment before. What can you tell us about attachment or attachment styles?
Oh my gosh, I have to kind of go back into my memory. There's anxious attachment. There is, obviously secure attachment. Secure attachment obviously is the end result of the way that we have interacted with our parents and our other caregivers early in our life. So those relationships often inform our relationships, our romantic relationships, not just our romantic relationships either, but our friendships and our relationships with our coworkers. When we often maybe think that I'll go back a little bit, if our brains have been rewired to think that when we cry or try to communicate, that those are not being heard, and that has rewired our brains to not trust the people that we are biologically wired to trust or sociologically wired to trust, that can build into a lack of self-esteem, where it's if I speak up and say something, they don't listen to me, so maybe I better be quiet, but then I'm not being authentic to myself. Then you have another attachment style is the anxious attachment style, which is essentially the opposite of the secure attachment style, where we have had a history, our brains have been biologically wired to distrust our attachment to our attachment figure, or even second guess whether or not we're our worthiness, and also our authenticity. And Gabor Mate goes into authenticity and attachment in his book The Myth of Normal, which is another really fascinating read.
Is attachment and attachment styles much more important than we realize? And I'm talking even later in life. You know, what you learned in terms of attachment as a child, it's big. It seems like it really is.
Yeah, and this is one of the areas where we're getting a lot of new emerging information about, it comes back down to our early interactions with our caregivers. Lots of the studies that have been done have been on mothers, and so I do feel that is not necessarily, it doesn't give enough credence to the importance of the role of dad, or the male parent in the family unit, if there is one. But it's basically the way that we connect to or attach to our caregivers simply informs the way that we develop relationships later on in life. And that can also inform how we communicate. Remember, crying is our first method of communication. And when those cries go ignored, that begins to rewire our brains. And so responsive parenting versus non-responsive parenting, it's being shown has a very large impact, not just on the mental health of the child, but also on the physical health. People who have had adverse childhood events are more likely to experience metabolic disorders, heart issues. There is a long list of health issues that can be associated with attachment, or lack of attachment, I guess I should say.
Well, you said something just a second ago. For me, was red flag, red light went off. In that later in life, I mean, it rewired your brain. That baby crying, that's rewiring it. Whoa. That's major. That is huge right there. And we talk about neurodivergent and things like that, but that's really, that's an eye opener. There it is right there. Wow.
Yeah, it's really profound. And I don't think that, again, parents aren't to blame, but when we reframe, I guess, or retell the story of parenting, again, without putting the blame on the parents, we need to refocus or reframe on how those early interactions can really impact not just your child's mental health, their current state of health, but, their health later on in life. And I think that starts with, the medical community, nonprofits and community-based organizations that, whose mandate are, parenting, healthy families, healthy communities, because that's where it starts. It starts at that family unit where we experience the trust and attachment that is needed for our survival.
Well, certainly younger parents can take note of this and maybe look at things a little bit differently. Again, nobody's doing anything wrong. I'm still, my youngest is just turned 18. I'm still waiting for the manual to come, the parent manual. It hasn't arrived yet.
Right, me too. The stork forgot to drop that one off.
I thought it was
the baby.
I know. I thought it was a package deal. It comes with it.
Exactly.
But it's also something for us to look at as adults and why we may do what we do. You, Angie, you could support people in Canada, certainly in your province. Outside of that, not so much, as I understand it, right?
So I have been registered in other provinces. I've been registered in Alberta, and I've been registered in Newfoundland and Labrador. That being said, I haven't had any inquiries, or no one has reached out to me from those provinces. But if I ever do get an inquiry from somebody who is needing support, I'm more than happy to look at the ways or the requirements for registration for electronic or virtual, offering virtual support in those provinces, and I will very likely be eligible to sign up or become registered to provide virtual services.
What's your website?
www.whitedovecounseling.ca.
Thank you for an eye-opener today. Whoa. As we think, as parents, we think back to, raising our kids and maybe a little bit, what might we have done a little bit differently? We don't know. What are we piling on what our parents did and their parents before that and their parents before that? Very interesting. Thank you so much for being here today.
You're most welcome. My pleasure.
This is the Global Podcast Network, where executives and professionals connect, share, and inspire. Stay tuned for the conversations that drive success.